This is episode 132 of the Mindset Game podcast, and I'm your host, James Roberts. I'm a two-time Paralympian, online training and nutrition coach, and owner of James Robert Fitness. You can find more of my content by going to my website, fitamputee.co.uk. Each week on the Mindset Game podcast, we bring you an inspirational athlete, message, or expert talking about human optimization to teach you how to change the perception of your mindset and become 1% better. And on today's show, I've got JR Glymph. He's the founder of Go Defylife and the Defy Life Podcast. He believes there's a need within everyone to defy life. Make sure to share this with your friends on your Instagram story, on Twitter, or on Facebook. They can find this episode on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere that they listen to podcasts by searching for Mindset Game Podcast. In the episode, we talked about how did the Defy Life podcast come about, what is his opinion on how people can improve themselves by 1%, and how can they change their perception of their mindset, his trial and tribulations he faced as a high school athlete, and finally, has basketball become a new age versus old school, and not forgetting what is his opinion on accepting criticism. Take a screenshot and tag at Go Defylife and at James O. Roberts 11. Without further ado, let's get into today's show. So welcome on to the show, JR.
Hi James, thanks for having me.
So before we delve into today's topic, JR, for the listeners that don't know about your podcast to start with, can you give a little bit of a brief description?
Absolutely. So the Defy Life Podcast is it's the main podcast on my podcast network. So it's our flagship podcast, but it's hosted by myself and my co-founders, Gerald Hedrick, Keon Small, Thomas Stevens, and Alan Glymph. So we talk a variety of topics: sports, current events, politics, parenthood, and we have a trivia session. So pretty much whatever comes up, we talk about it.
So it could vary week to week, then, I presume.
Yeah, and it is sports centric. But with all of us being husbands and fathers, anything kind of comes up every now and then.
Well, I think rightly so. And then obviously, well, as we're recording this, I think I'm trying to think when my episode was out, but it's quite recently I was on your show. Obviously, not with you yourself because of Hurricane Florence, but obviously that's if for my listeners, if you get a chance, do take a listen to that episode. Yeah,
absolutely. You had an opportunity to sit down with Gerald, and really awesome interview, man. We enjoyed you. Gerald had a ball.
Well, he asked some questions I wasn't expecting, so that's always good.
Cool. Oh yeah, we try to keep people on their toes. So we hope you enjoyed it.
Oh, I did. He obviously had his own questions that he wanted to ask, and then some that he'd how would I put this? Pre-transcribed to ask me, and then obviously the following questions went from there. But first of all, what my first question to you would be, JR, is how did you come up with the initial idea of releasing that podcast in the first place?
Well, we started Defy Life as just a blog initially, and I had been in sports media and blogging for about 12 years, and I wanted to step away from doing just sports and branch out to doing focusing on entrepreneurship and focusing on local art, like independent artists, things like that. And two friends of mine was Keon and Thomas, who were my co-founders. Reached out to them. They voiced, previously interest in doing the same thing. They just didn't know how to get started. So I reached out when I left my old company and asked them if they wanted to just do this together. And we reached out, started the blog, and about 6 months later, we started the podcast, and it's kind of been doing it ever since. So we're about a year and a half in now.
I'm assuming going from strength to strength.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And my follow-on question for that, Joe, would be, in your opinion, how can people improve themselves by 1%?
Well, as a former athlete myself, I'm sure you can relate. I tend to, after you get out of structured competition, it's more about competing with yourself, and trying to be better than you were the day before, even if it's just in one area of your life. So that's what I focus on, whether it's on being a better father, being a better business person. I compete with myself, and set goals, write them down, make them tangible, and just focus on being a better whatever part of my life than I was the day before.
And is that looking more inwards as opposed to most people in society today look for and kind of an extrinsic motivation?
Yes, absolutely. And whether that comes down to, whether it's tangible numbers, even if something's, for us that matters as far as like podcast streams and downloads, or, whether it's something that can't be measured in numbers, just always focusing inward and competing with myself on a day-to-day basis.
And this probably moves nicely to my next question for you. In your opinion, how can people change their perception of mindset now?
For one, especially in current culture, we have a tendency to compare ourselves to others, what they have and what they're doing, and especially with social media being such a big aspect of it, is we rarely get the opportunity to know people on a personal level. We only get what they are willing to show us. So developing that mindset to, again, looking inward and focusing on the things that you can control. And most of those things are things within us.
And probably more specifically, JR, what do you think the young athlete should really do? Because obviously they've got access to, be it social media, television, and from some perspectives, what a news outlet shows what a higher level athlete is doing is not always the truth. How would you get them to probably perceive the outside world in terms of that, be it their perception from a mindset perspective, but also how to improve themselves without getting external factors being a little bit overwhelming?
Yeah, absolutely. The one thing I tell anyone is don't be afraid of hard work, and understand that nobody mistakes their way into success. It takes a lot of hard work. It takes a lot of willful diligence. And so use your resources. There are, whether you know someone or you know someone that knows someone who has past success or current success in any endeavor that may lie in with your interest, reach out. Don't be afraid to reach out to people and take chances. We have, everything that we need is provided to us. It's just a matter of reaching out and doing it. So if you're an athlete, understand that what you put into your body, and not even just what you eat and what you drink, but what you ingest, through television, through social media, the people you hang around, everything that you put into your body and you consume is going to show up in the results. So if you are, really, really serious about your intentions, you've got to be willing to put in the work and make some sacrifices.
And JR, in the beginning of the episode, you talked about your background in sports. I'm assuming because you come from a how would I put this? Trying to be as PC as possible. Being from an earlier generation than say the millennials. I'm assuming you did more than one sport in high school.
Yeah, absolutely. I was a football player, basketball player. I threw shot put and discus. Played baseball up until early high school, so I was pretty busy year round.
And what were kind of some of the trials and tribulations you had to face and kind of get that, you could say, that work-life balance?
I had two older sisters who were athletes as well, and both played basketball in college. So I kind of had that blueprint laid out for me. And my parents stressed education first. So in a lot of senses, it wasn't an option. To have both. My academics and my athletics in line. And when they weren't, I heard about it and it was worked on. But it was, as a young, when you're 16, 17, 18, sometimes you do lose focus. But again, it's about surrounding yourself with the right people and setting goals and listening to the people who've been there before you and kind of following that blueprint.
But you mentioned there that you did football, basketball, and shot put. How was the training implemented that you were kind of being able to be successful over a multitude of sports, because they're very different in terms of the energy requirements that that they're going to need and require, but they're more so be it position specific as well.
Yeah, for one, I'll say this, that all sports that I played, and again, the people around me, but me specifically, all the sports that I played helped me in some area in the other sports. So when I was playing basketball, my footwork and hand-eye coordination, that kind of stuff helps you with football. And in football, the use of your quads and, the technique that you use in football kind of helped me in, as far as, like specific movements help me in basketball and in track and shot put and discus. So I think those things kind of overlap and help you even when you don't realize they're helping you. But then it also helps to have understanding coaches, because a lot of times those seasons kind of overlap. And so they understand that, when you're done with one, you'll be there for the other. So to kind of get that, you kind of have to finish one task before you take on another, especially in high school. You can't play two sports at once. You kind of have to, have the understanding of your coaches to know that, one season has to end before you jump into another.
But then was that not problematic at times? But then I'm assuming from what you've just mentioned there, you had coaches that were very understanding of that, be it playoff run and things of that nature.
Yeah, and what I noticed today is a lot of, I have a nephew who plays football in college now, and, of course, being from an entirely different generation, as you mentioned, some coaches nowadays aren't as understanding, and they want kids to be more sports specific and specialized. So there's not a lot of that understanding anymore. But I'm always an advocate for multiple sports and for kids to play different sports and not be so specialized at an early age, because one, it helps them grow in all areas. You work different muscles, you work different body parts, you learn different techniques. And so coaches, I wish, all coaches would understand that, it's not taking anything away from your specific team or sport, that it's only going to help the kid in the long run.
That's probably great that you answered that. So I was going to ask you, what was your take in terms of, do you think, and probably maybe more so in the United States, it's become more of a systematic problem in terms of people probably regressing to a certain extent because they're not able to experience a multitude of sports at a young age, thus possibly, from a physical sense, they're hampering their bodies because because of all the repetitive movements. But in terms of going back to your early days in sport, what kind of positions did you have to play?
Well, in football, which I also played in college, it was there are two sides of the ball. So I played offensive line and linebacker. So that was two totally different skill sets, which helped also. And then in basketball, I was a power forward. So that's a different skill set. And I was I was a shorter, broader power forward. So in the Charles Barkley sense. So had to use a different kind of skill set as far as defensive skills. How to get your shot off over taller players, things of that nature. And again, shot putting, discus, and track. And then baseball, I played first base. So pretty much learning and relearning things throughout the year. It helped me. Helps you focus, helps you grow, helps you step outside of your comfort zone a lot. And also, playing multiple sports, you learn how to deal with so many different types of personalities. So it was definitely helpful.
And I think you mentioned you raised a great point there, JR. What really enthuses me in terms of your answer is because you said you played offensive line but played linebacker. I would have thought by you playing offensive line, I'd have thought you'd have played on the defensive line itself.
Yeah, that's funny. So a little bit of background on that. So I was in middle school. I was an offensive lineman and a defensive lineman to start out, and I begged my coach to play linebacker, and of course he thought I was I was bigger than most kids, so he thought, of course, naturally you're going to play on the line. But as first game of the season, I went out, chased down a couple quarterbacks, batted down a couple passes, and he saw that, okay, you move like a linebacker, so let's give this a shot. And so they pretty much kept me there once I moved on to high school and just kept me a linebacker.
That's quite interesting. But then, obviously, let's get your take on this more from the basketball sense now. You played power forward. Do you think now we kind of transgress and move to the present day? Do you think from a basketball sense, we'll say the NBA is probably transitioned, but do you think it's kind of coming down the levels, be it college and high school, where there's no real need for, say, somebody, that historically would be a center and things of that nature, and like kind of some positions are probably non-existent. The other example would probably be like a point guard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we talk about this on the show quite often. Is now, especially the NBA, like you mentioned, it's kind of morphed into a positionless game. And it's more about roles than it is positions at this point. And it's interesting. Whenever I play like pickup games with like younger guys, and I go to post up or play with your back to the basket, they call you old school. So it's a different game now. And if nowadays you have all five positions on the court that can shoot, and I mean shoot with range, like out to 3-point range. And when I was younger, those guys were considered, teams had a 3-point specialist. Now it's a requirement to be able to shoot from distance. So it's definitely a different game.
But why do you think they call it old school? And I very much echo your sentiment in terms of it, because I'll play against younger people as well, and they'll ask me, why do I do it? Well, I do it because it's an advantage. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's really old school because they're not familiar with it. You see, kids who are 6'8" and above who aren't taught to play with their back to the basket. So that's just not the game that they're familiar with. And so they don't understand why you would back someone down in the lane and take time to work on post moves, and when you can just shoot from 3-point range all day. So it's definitely a different game. And yeah, you're right. A lot of them don't understand it. They don't understand the nuances of it, the importance of it, how it affects, spacing and ball movement. So it's just something that the younger generation is not familiar with. And I'm not saying one's better than the other by any means, but it's just different.
But would you think, in one sense, the people of, say, oh gosh, when would it have gone out of fashion? Say from before the 2000s, would coin some of these players to some extent. It's going to be controversial now. A little bit soft, a little bit afraid of contact. Would that be something you would to some degree agree with?
Yeah, if we're comparing two, absolutely. And it's I would say across all sports. I mean, if look at the the NFL with, and rightfully so, with the emphasis on brain and head injuries, and the NBA with removing of hand checking, and enforcing rules on flopping, and instituting zone rules, zone defenses. It's definitely a more body friendly game, I guess I'll say, than it was. But I guess every generation kind of looks at it that way. My father's generation probably thought we were soft, and so me being I'm 40, so I look at the generation now, and to me, yes, I would agree that it's a softer game. It's a less impeding game for offenses. So it is a bit softer. But then again, like I always say, whatever sport it is, whether it's football or boxing or basketball, you look at guys who play professionally for a decade or more, and I would prefer those guys be able to walk and talk when they're 50. So I have no problems with it.
But do you think that is why maybe the younger generation has more an emphasis on offense as opposed to, say, you and I being proud of our defensive efforts?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a lot of facets that go into that. One, again, it's just not how they're taught to play. But then also, they don't know a world without SportsCenter, or a world without YouTube, or so they can just see highlights all day. And it's rare that they have an entire video highlight clip of defensive stops. It hardly happens. So kids are out the womb. They're immersed in offensive highlights and stats and scoring and fantasy numbers. In fantasy league. So it's definitely most sports are offensively driven. And again, you go back to sports like boxing. Floyd Mayweather gets a lot of flack because he's a defensive-based fighter. He doesn't knock anybody out. But again, they don't make highlight reels of those things. So, kids, my sons are 11 and 9, and most of outside of me talking to them, most of their sports knowledge and sports history knowledge comes from YouTube.
But how would you change that perception and, in essence, mindset to be, we'll coin it, old school?
Mm-hmm. I think it takes being hands-on and passing those things down from generation to generation. And again, I'm hands-on with my kids. I go out and play with them. I show them things. Take them to the basketball court, go in the yard and play with them. Throw the football around, and I show them things that they're not going to see in a highlight reel. And I think, especially as parents, we have to be mindful not to leave everything up to coaches, because coaches have a lot of kids to deal with, and they can't show kids every single thing if they're not getting exposure to it from anywhere else. So I think as parents, as fathers, we have to be hands-on and pass those, whether it's techniques and skills and the history of sport down to our children, so it's not a lost concept.
I definitely echo that sentiment in terms of be it play against your parents, your father, or whatnot, because, well, gone are the days me doing that against my father, because once he lost to me now in the game of pickup, it's like, yeah, I'm not going to play you anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, my dad stopped playing me when I was 14, so it's like he couldn't beat me anymore. So, yeah.
Well, I probably learned from my father in terms of the post game. What is he, 6'3", Gosh, weighs quite a lot more than me. So he's going to use that as an advantage and chuck his weight around. So I didn't like it back then as a teenager. It's like, well, you're using your, we'll call it brute force to a certain extent to be able to overpower me.
Yeah,
but
back then we called it old man strength. And you don't understand the benefits of old man strength until you get it.
Yeah.
So, and we talked about this on one of our topics. One of my co-hosts, Keon, has a son who's 3, and so he's kind of getting into that that space where he's able to play around with him in the yard and show him how to play things. And that's one thing we stress to him is don't let him win, because that builds character. Because I can remember the first time I beat my father in basketball. And it wouldn't have been such a memorable accomplishment if he just let me win since I was 5. So that's one thing we have to appreciate about being old school is not letting kids win all the time.
But you mentioned that, and then I'll probably go a step further than that. How do you think you could maybe approach this notion of, well, to a certain extent failure, but being able to put somebody accountable, whereas my coach would be able to approach me in a different light than, say, somebody, say 10 years my junior, because, okay, I was fortunate to compete at a higher level than I do now, so I'm used to, well, I would coin it constructive criticism as opposed to being criticism outright, because, okay, you are giving me information, be it I'm not doing something up to standard, which is fair enough, because you'll look at it and say, okay, you are right. It's a different set of eyes, because what you see from the bench as opposed to on court is night and day. So I don't know, how would you kind of go from that notion, being able to be not their harshest critic, but giving them that sense of, well, yeah, you are doing things well, but you need to look at these fine details as well.
Yeah, that's a very good question, because I think it can differ from person to person. And again, my kids are polar opposites as far as how they accept criticism. So I've learned to communicate with them in different ways. So like my oldest son, he takes criticism very harshly. So I'm always making it a point to point out to him that I'm not putting you down, but these are things I want you to work on. And my youngest son he thinks he's LeBron already, and he's 9. So I kind of have with him. It's the opposite, is to kind of keep it in perspective. Regardless of how good you are, there's always someone out there working hard to be better than you. And the only way to keep getting better is to play people better than you, play older kids, so you're not content. So I think that message has to be delivered based on the person you're dealing with. Because I had a coach that had this saying: is some people need a pat on the back, some people need a kick in the butt. So it's it depends on who's receiving that message of how you deliver it.
And this is probably a little bit controversial, JR. Why do you think maybe some people in the millennium era are content with playing a lesser opponent?
Yeah, and that's really controversial, because again, in a lot of youth leagues now, they don't keep score, or everybody gets a trophy, and so we don't teach our kids how to accept failure, and to get them to understand that failure is not necessarily a bad thing. That's one thing I always try to get through to my kids: is failure is an opportunity to learn, and that's how you get better. And so I think that's a big part of it. Is and I say we collectively, is that we are teaching our kids that failure is an end when it's only a new beginning, and it doesn't have to be a bad thing. So we've kind of found ways to protect them from the world and protect them from reality, because the reality of it is a lot of times, somebody's going to be better than you, and you're going to have to work to get better. Sometimes somebody's going to work harder than you. You're going to have to step it up. And those are things that we have to continue to instill in our youth, and young athletes in particular, because those are major building blocks, for success.
And my final question for you, JR, before we wrap up the episode, is if you had to summarize what we've been speaking about today into one sentence for people to take away, what would that be?
Oh, wow. Don't be afraid to take a couple steps back for the long-term view. Is how I would sum it up. It's, sometimes you have to make those sacrifices. Sometimes you do have to lose in order to learn how to win. So, don't be afraid to take a couple steps back to sacrifice getting better in the end.
So once again, JR, thanks again for coming on the Mindset Game podcast.
James, thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
It's been my pleasure. If you like this episode, please do share it with your friends, and do let JR and I know what you thought of the episode by tagging us over on Instagram at Go Defylife and at James O. Roberts 11, on Twitter and Facebook, and again do check out his podcast Defy Life. Make sure to check that out. The link will be in the description. You can find all the show notes at mindsetgame.lipsum.com under the category Sports. Once again, thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time for another episode of the Mindset Game podcast.